Condoms cause divorce. The least popular teaching of Saint Porphyrios. Saint Porphyrios of Kafsokalivia was a great saint of our time. He was a monk on the holy mountain of Athos, starting when he was very young. And by the time he was 16 years old, he entered into the kingdom of heaven. I have been to the very spot upon which Saint Porphyrios was deified, entered into the state theologically termed theosis, union with God. And he lived in paradise while in the body, starting from the age of 16. That's extraordinary. Now, after St. Porphyrios spent his time as a teenager, as a young monk on Mount Athos, he was made a priest by the time he was in his early 20s, and then for reasons of divine providence, he was transferred to Athens, where he was the priest, chaplain at a hospital, the Polyclinic in Athens, and I have been to the temple where he served. So many divine liturgies. Now, St. Porphyrios is a much beloved saint, and there are books you can read of his teachings in English. However, like all the saints, he gave teachings which were unpopular. And one of the problems of our time is dishonesty with respect to the teachings of the saints. This is also true, perhaps even more so, about St. Paisius. There are many things that St. Paisius taught that people were simply not willing to write down, or they were willing to write them down in Greek, but nobody was willing to translate them into English. We'll do another video on that. This particular teaching of St. Porphyrios on the most common cause of divorce is so unpopular amongst his own spiritual children that they generally had a very difficult time hearing it. They would blush, they would be ashamed, they would be embarrassed or in disbelief and didn't want to listen to him. And he was very humble, so if they didn't want to receive a teaching, he would shut his mouth. Pearls before swine is the principle there. So this particular teaching has come down to me simply because, by virtue of the fact that I'm able to listen to people who knew St. Porphyrios, who were his friends, I'm also able to spend time with people who were personal friends with St. Paisius. My spiritual father was St. Paisius' next door neighbor for 25 years on Mount Athos. And I've also been able to speak to a number of people who were personal friends of St. Jacob of Evia. So it's very, very beneficial if you either get to meet a saint yourself in person or get to meet people who were personal friends of that saint, because then you will hear things from the mouth of the saint, including things which people were not willing, usually for reasons of their own lack of faith or impiety or weakness, that they simply weren't willing to write down. Or, as I said, they were willing to write down perhaps in Greek, but people didn't want to translate certain things into English. So here is what I have determined to be the least popular teaching of St. Porphyrios. But this is one of the most profoundly enlightened men of our time. And we need to listen to the teachings of the saints. And I say, especially their least popular teachings, especially those. Because the teachings of the saints of our time, like St. Porphyrios, St. Paisius, St. John of St. Francisco, St. Seraphim of Platina, aka Father Seraphim Rose, all of these saints gave very unpopular teachings, teachings that were unpopular sometimes amongst their own spiritual children or friends. Those teachings are often the ones that we need most for salvation, because why did people reject these teachings? It's because they run counter to the spirit of our time. The saints live both in our time and also outside of time in paradise while with us in the body. And so this teaching is unto salvation for married Orthodox Christians. Here's how the teaching was first given, and I will share it with you as it has come down to me. A woman goes to see St. Porphyrios. As I said, he was in Athens for many years, for about 30 years, so anyone could go see him who wished. This was a laywoman, and she was a woman who was very, very sad and heartbroken and in pain over her recent divorce. St. Porphyrios wanted her to know the cause of this divorce. Now, she thought it was just that she and her husband couldn't get along, and they had a falling out. Nobody was cheating, by the way. There was no infidelity. It was just effectively their relationship, their personal relationship, had devolved into a quarrelsome quagmire, a mess. They couldn't be with each other, so they got divorced. And St. Porphyrios told this woman the cause of her divorce, and the cause of so many divorces, and she didn't want to hear it. And if you are either a married Orthodox Christian or contemplating marriage, please take this teaching to heart so that you can have a joyful, loving, and peaceful marriage that pleases God. St. Porphyrios told her frankly and bluntly, your use of condoms caused your divorce. Oh, she didn't want to hear that. She did not want to hear it. I'll just tell you again bluntly, as he told her, you used condoms with your husband. This is what caused her divorce. Now, was this because St. Porphyrios was procreation obsessed? Was he saying, oh, the condoms caused divorce because that's a way of avoiding children, therefore you're just selfish? He wasn't emphasizing that at all. Orthodox Christians acknowledge that the primary purpose of marriage is love. A container of sexual continence, which is to say a God-blessed container for conjugal physical expression of divine eros between man and wife, allows for the sexual energies of those people to be contained. Not to the level of one in the angelic life of a monk or a nun, but still contained in a God-pleasing, God-blessed, holy way, which is a mystical picture of Christ's intimacy with his church. What a profound blessing for the married people, that they get to live out this picture of Christian worship as the mystery of Christ intimate with his church. And the Song of Solomon emphasizes the ascetical aspect of lovemaking, which is that Christ is the woman in the Song of Solomon. You, the reader, the man, are pursuing Christ. According to the Holy Fathers, that's the woman in the Song of Songs. The woman is Jesus Christ. You, the reader, are meant to be the man pursuing Jesus Christ, your beloved. But on to this teaching of St. Porphyrios again. So he explained the following, and I'll extrapolate and expand upon it in my own way. Forgive me for any of my own weakness that I've interjected here. But St. Porphyrios again told her bluntly, your use of condoms caused your divorce. And then he explained as follows. This condom is a physical barrier between your body and your husband's body. This is not the way that God intended for Christian couples to enjoy each other. It was not the intention of God for you to have a physical barrier during the act of lovemaking between yourself and your man. This was not the will of God. But because you used condoms for a protracted period, because you were using condoms, you erected a physical barrier. Inside of your lovemaking, you erected an artificial, man-made physical barrier which is not pleasing to God, because that is not how he designed sex. God designed sex. Condoms weren't included. And he said then, as it were downstream of that, this created an emotional and finally a spiritual barrier between yourself and your husband. And that's why you couldn't get along, and that's why you got divorced. You got divorced because you used condoms. You got divorced because you used condoms. The explanations of the saints are often profoundly simple. I'll give you a corollary. One of my voice students told me a story recently. She has two friends that are married, and they were not getting along. And they went to see their spiritual father about it. Priests here in Greece are well known for being able to help Christian married couples sort out their marriages. And the priest listened to them, and he said the following: "It's clear to me that you two are not getting along in conversation, you're not getting along emotionally, you're not getting along in the house, simply because you're not having enough sex. So my obedience to the two of you is have more sex, and what you're going to find is that if you have more sex, you're going to get along in conversation, and your emotions will harmonize." And my friend and student told me, and that's exactly what they did. They started having more sex, and they started getting along, and now they're happily married. Very often the solutions from Orthodox spiritual fathers, especially in places like Greece, where they have a much greater degree of enlightenment than is normal in the rest of the world, often the solutions are very simple. In this case, the etiology of divorce, the cause of the divorce, was profoundly simple. You used condoms. You erected a physical barrier. This created an emotional and finally a spiritual barrier. You and your husband could no longer bear to be with each other. This was the cause of your divorce. Now let's look at this a bit. Sex, as we have said previously, as has been emphasized by the saints, sex is sacred. You must treat it that way, but it's already sacred because God made it like that. And sex is always a simultaneity of the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. All three ingredients are included all of the time. And those three ingredients, the physical, as in the sexual desire, the emotional, the romantic chemistry, the intimacy, and the spiritual reality of two bodies and souls actually becoming one on the path to salvation. This is all always included all the time in sex. That's what's happening. Whether you know that or not, that's what's happening. So he explained that you put a physical barrier between yourself and your husband during sex, generated an emotional and spiritual barrier effectively, and so this was the cause of your split. Now, never mind that that woman was too uncomfortable and unwilling to hear the saint. Perhaps you'll be willing to hear Saint Porphyrios speaking to us from paradise. If you wish to be happily married, don't use condoms.